Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. No tournaments since we last spoke. However, there has been an update to the restriction list, and we need to talk about it. Obviously, if you're here, it's very likely that you've already heard what it is. Two things got added. For Quints, choose one of three instead of choose one of two. They added the Brainstormer, the 5-card Brainstormer that looks for Ichikas. You can also pay one and sack it to look it up to 4 and add one. The other restriction, and the one that's garnered most of the attention, is SDS, the Escanor Riki that is required to ditch for the Escanor top end, has been put on a choice restriction list, choose one of two, with the Gil Thunder level 3 bouncer that also rearranges the top 3 triggers in the deck. The effect of these bans, pretty straightforward. Neither of these decks are nuked, and I think that's important to note. For Quints, it is a little bit of deck speed primarily, and also it's harder to get those one of Ichikas. You can tech in some Ichikas. There's a stock healer, there's a summoner that allows you to do an extra bit of damage by tapping it and then replace it with your level 3 combo. So it becomes a little bit harder to just seek those out. And it's also a mill 9, essentially, because you're paying one to Brainstorm 5, and then you can pay one and sack it to look at 4 more. So it's a way for Quints to get out of bad deck states and get to its refresh point pretty quickly. On the SDS side, the Gil Thunder basically does 2 things that the deck really wants, which is it opens up lanes, both to push more damage for the Escanor, and also deny counters. Because Escanor does require a full board, a memory counter into Escanor can be pretty lethal. So the Gil Thunder bouncing things away makes that less possible, while also, like I said, opening up more damage lanes, and also checks 3 triggers and rearranges them, allowing the Escanor player to choose their lanes and swing with them, swing with the Escanors rather, with the triggers that they want to maximize the number of soul triggers they have, so that they can do more burn damage. Both of these decks are going to be competitively probably fine. Quintuplets is going to have to lean into other mill tools, maybe up its counts of a couple of choice Ichikas, but that doesn't break it by any means. 7 Deadly Sins, they're going to lean into the CX swapper more, probably. That top checks 2, and the Merlin early play that can bounce characters. So they still have both bounce and top check, but they don't have them on the same card anymore. So a little bit less consistency for 7 Deadly Sins on its top end. So those are the restrictions and like the gameplay ramifications of them. And I'm sure that, there are other ramifications that we didn't talk about. They've been talked about at length by a lot of people, a lot of really good players. So we're not going to get too much into detail there. What we're going to talk about here, more than anything else, is what we make of the ban list, the state of the ban list, and what this latest set of restrictions tells us about the way that Bushiroad wants to use the restriction list going forward. And frankly, Brandon, I think that this specific restriction gives us more questions than answers. So the first thing I want to point out is, and we're going to try to keep this somewhat organized, right? We'll have something on screen, hopefully, to organize the conversation a little. But the thing that I notice immediately is, so on the post, which we'll link in the description, to the restriction list with like the graphic that they made and everything, at the very bottom, the last thing it says on the page before it gets to just, the page matter stuff. We will continue to monitor tournament statistics in the coming months to ensure the tournament environment remains healthy. Okay, Bushiroad has a stated purpose for the ban list: ensuring the tournament environment remains healthy. You can have long arguments over whether or not the tournament environment was healthy before this ban list. We're not going to get into that. My bigger concern is that is bullcrap. That is not true. Bushiroad is straight up telling us something that is factually incorrect. Basically, there are 4 things, I think, that you could feasibly argue are Bushiroad's intentions with the ban list. in terms of like what they're trying to hit, right? The 4 things that they're kind of looking for. One is win rate. They want to hit the stuff that has the highest win rate. They did not do that with this list. They did not do that with this restriction because Hololive has the highest win rate out of anything in Springfest right now. Hololive has more top 4s, it has more top 8s, and it's not close in either of those categories. It has 9 more top 8s than SDS and 4 more than 8 standby. So if they wanted to hit things based on how often they were winning, they would have hit Hololive and they didn't. And Hololive's still, obviously, completely unrestricted. The second is representation rate. Maybe it's just people are playing too much of one thing and they want to keep the tournament environment balanced in terms of you don't have to play into the same thing over and over again. Again, Hololive is the most played thing. Alexander's data, while incomplete, demonstrates pretty clearly that Hololive is the thing that people are playing more than anything else at Springfest. Third, there are some people who have made the argument that maybe Bushiroad just wants to restrict the cards that don't allow interaction, that are not fun to play against. And they'll point to things like the tap counter in Mushoku Tensei that got hit, or the charm event in quintuplets that got hit, which are, tap counter / neg soul type of effects. Again, Hololive has both of those kinds of things. The neg soul top-ended Sora, which is unrestricted, and a tap counter, which is unrestricted. If they were serious about using the ban list to ensure that the tournament environment remained healthy, Hololive would be restricted because it's the most played thing, it has more wins than anything else, and it has cards that you could very easily consider unfun in the same way that other banned cards have been considered. Finally, and I said this on Twitter at one point, that it's suspicious to me that they would not ban Hololive specifically because they know Hololive is going to sell ridiculously when it comes out, and that maybe they aren't hitting it because it's their cash cow. But the more I think about it, the more that's not true either. Like, I want to be almost conspiratorial at this point because at least you have something that makes sense, but that doesn't make sense either. Because Quint's movie is coming out. Does banning or restricting Quint's affect the sales of Quint's movie set in one way or another? Would banning or unbanning Hololive affect the sales of Hololive in one way or another? If it were consistent, I think you could make an argument one way or the other, but again, it's not consistent. Because Quint's movie is going to sell really well, just like Hololive 2 is going to sell really well. I think Hololive 2 will probably sell better, just because it's more popular IP. But they're both going to sell in English quite well, if only because they're competitively viable. So I don't know. I don't know why they're restricting what they're restricting. I'm looking at this ban list and I go, why is Kaguya still here? If you cared about a healthy tournament environment, you would unban Kaguya, because Kaguya has literally topped 4 times in Springfest. They can't just be looking at Worlds data either, because Kaguya wasn't at Worlds. Why is it still on the restriction list if it's not even getting played in its restricted state at Worlds? Mushoku Tensei, showed up at Worlds and barely did anything. Why is Mushoku Tensei still hit and Hololive is still running around? There's no consistency here. And I think that's the thing that bugs me the most about this restriction list, is that there's no consistency anywhere. I have been trying to find a narrative. I've been trying to find a reason, and I cannot find a reason for why the restriction list looks like this when you use any other criteria. The restriction list should look very, very different.
I think especially kind of what that boils into is having an explanation for the bans, as opposed to we're monitoring tournament data. So kind of with that in mind, in a lot of ways, this also feels very reactionary. Ban lists typically are, right? Ban lists typically react to, hey, no, this is not doing what we was expected to do, so we need to bring it into line of what we expect it to be.
Yeah.
But not having those expectations of what we expect it to be very much in play and what we are looking for to see in how a deck should run and how a deck should be, I think opens that up to a lot of speculation.
Well, it's why we're making this. It's why we're making this video. We could, if Bushiroad did what Magic does, if they did what Wizards does and just say, hey, we're banning Questing Beast because it's way too good, then okay. At the very least, we have a reason now, if they wanted to say that, the Guild Thunder just makes 7 Deadly Sins top end way too consistent, then okay, at least we have a reason. But they didn't give us a reason. Other card games give reasons, and those reasons at least allow us to assess Bushiroad's ability to read the meta. But we can't even do that with this.
Because the other side of that coin, I think, is timing. And I think timing plays a huge factor in that too, in regards to like the timing of when they put out the ban list.
For multiple reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for multiple reasons. So we are only about a fourth of the way into Springfest, right? About fourth to a third. SDS has been out about less than 5 months. With that in mind, like a set that's been out less than 5 months to already get hit on the ban list tells me that either they didn't expect this kind of interaction, which is strange because it's self-contained within the set, leads me to wonder a little bit about kind of that questioning of, did they not expect damage output at the top end of what the damage could do? Which I think that they did expect it, and I think that they planned on it because of what we're seeing in future sets, right? We're seeing in future sets things that have this kind of same kind of damage potential and damage outcomes with less and less opponent interaction, right?
Yeah, and I want to put a pin in that just for a brief second. If you have not read Avis's piece over on Weiss Tea Time about this very thing, about the failures of quality assurance and R&D at Bushiroad when it comes to the release of sets like SDS, I don't think, and we'll talk more about this later on, like I don't think that SDS is necessarily as oppressive as a lot of people seem to think it is. But in terms of like Bushiroad's failures at like the quality control level, I absolutely cannot recommend Avis's piece enough. How about you just don't do anything? That will be linked in the description. You should definitely read that. It's very, very good and well-considered thoughts on the topic. Okay, pulling the pin back out and handing the conversation back to Brandon in regards to the oddness of banning a set like this when stuff that does the same thing is coming out very soon.
Like closing your opponent out from mid-level 2 is likely going to be a norm coming up pretty quickly.
Yeah. If you hate Escanor, you are going to despise Ainz. Ainz is coming. Argo is coming. Gura is coming. Just these absolutely ridiculous finishing combos that have multiple burns on them, usually for 1 or for 2, that just do damage almost at will and can kill you from the middle of level 2. They are omnipresent in a few months. So if you don't like Escanor, like if you as Bushiroad are looking around and you're going, ooh, Escanor's too powerful, I don't know what to tell you. You guys are about to release a whole lot more dangerous stuff here this year in terms of damage output at that same kind of level. So you better be ready to restrict all that stuff if you're that concerned about people just dying from 2-4. If that's the issue here, then that ship sailed. Especially if you're going to keep hitting things like tap counter in MTI and neg soul counter in Quints. Like, you can't hit the unfun defensive counter cards and the neg soul cards. And also just expect everyone to be cool with you letting, you know, Escanor and Ainz and Gura and company just roam free. Again, the inconsistency. But yeah, no, if you hate Escanor, there's a lot worse coming. It's going to be everywhere. You are not going to be able to live from 3-0 by the time we get to Worlds. But along those same lines in regards to timing, we talk about how, you know, very early on in the set's release, it's getting hit, and that feels bad. You know, just from a player perspective, there are a lot of people out there who didn't get to play this at full strength at an event that mattered, you know? Because there were only 5 total events where SDS was unrestricted. One of them was Worlds. So if you couldn't play in one of those because you lived in the wrong country, that feels pretty bad. But another issue is that it does happen mid-season. If this was a response to Worlds, it came super late. Like, if you wanted to immediately hit SDS and Quints after Worlds happened, and like call it an emergency ban, I could at least understand it. This makes no sense. You waited 3 months, watched SDS do worse at Springfest than it did at Worlds, and then you still hit it early in its lifespan. This is like, we're still in like the emergency ban kind of time period. You know, if you hit something in the first few months after it drops, you messed up. This is an English exclusive. You didn't bring this over from JP. You made these cards yourself. And if the instant you drop it, you went, whoops, we made it too powerful, at the very least, tell us. Call it an emergency ban. But they didn't do that. They just said, we're just going to restrict it. Like, okay, so now I'm definitely dissuaded from buying new sets. Like, I want to buy into Hololive 2. Are they going to just hit Gura before Worlds? Like, why would you buy Alice right now? Honestly, like, what are they going to do to Alice even before Singles is over, right? If you buy Alice thinking you're going to play Alice at Singles, then if they hit Alice in September and your Singles event is in October, it's like, well, dang, that's too bad for you. And like I said earlier, these hits are not drastic, but the precedent of hitting something at all this early when they have made drastic hits to things before, I'd be nervous. I would be nervous. And then to do it in the middle of the season, you know, weeks before someone who has already been playing a list potentially for months is about to take it to the most important event on the spring calendar, that just feels really bad. It's a very upsetting precedent. At the very least, let this stuff run through Springfest. And you know, we'll put a pin in why you can do that. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other reason, and something I think you probably want to get into a little bit here too, is that the timings of these bans have been a little bit suspicious. They've banned stuff mid-season before, but usually when they ban something, it feels like they're banning it right before something really good drops.
So the ban list is becoming active April 21st, which being, hey, look, this Friday. What comes out this Friday, Colton?
Sword Art's coming out, and Alice is real good, and Alice is unrestricted, and guess what has a harder time beating Alice now that it's been restricted? Everything, actually, as it turns out. Alice is really good, and it has access to all of its pieces. It doesn't have anything that specifically counters Escanor or Quince, but it's just good. It was already on the same tier as them, and now that you've poked those two down a little bit, that just gives Alice that much more room to work. And this isn't the first time we've seen this.
No, it's not. We saw this very, very similar happen with when Quince released, with Quince 2 release. We saw that hit the Mushoku ban.
I remember asking at the time, why hit the thing that has the most chance to keep the new good thing in check? And again, because they don't explain any of this to us, it's pretty easy to read that as because they don't want the new good thing to get checked. Until it's time for the next new thing, when they'll check the old thing by adding it to the restriction list. Hard not to be cynical, frankly.
Having that timing coming out just that same weekend, definitely something to be keeping track of, as this is definitely not the first time and probably not the last time.
I mean, who's to say that when Overlord comes out, maybe Alice gets a little bit of a hit? You know, who's to say? It's on the right timetable now.
I think you could probably even take your pick as to when it's going to get hit. Either August 8th or September 1st. I would say one of those 2 days, and I'm willing to call that now. Which one would you like, Colton?
Oh gosh. I think it's September. I'll think September because what'll happen is the single season will start, and Alice will maybe do well, and then that will give some maybe give some cover. It's like, ooh, Alice is really good in the format, in the singles format. It's really good. We need to restrict it on the weekend that Ainz comes out or something like that. And here's the thing, even if this does not happen, Bushiroad has given us no indication that they won't. Are we trying to say that Alice is going to be less good than Escanor? I don't think anyone thinks that they're not at least on the same tier.
It's also worth noting that Alice in this most recent ban list didn't get hit for JP. So currently, Alice is also unrestricted in Japan as well.
Mm-hmm. And like, I'm less willing to maybe call the shot than Brandon is, but it makes sense. I expect it will be hit sometime during singles. And if they don't hit it, especially if it does as well as we expect it to do, if they don't hit it, what are they doing? SDS is good for a few months and then they hit it. If Alice has even similar numbers, and I anticipate that it will, why would you let that go? It's the inconsistency. Again, going all the way back to the top, it is the inconsistency of the implementation of the restriction list. And I think the worst part for me, and this is very much my opinion, I don't know if Brandon agrees with this. The worst part of this all for me is that you could unrestrict everything and we would have a healthy meta. Does anyone think that Data Live would just run rampant if it was completely unbanned right now? It would be probably close to top tier, if not top tier. It might even be the best deck in the format. But it wouldn't be just as dominant. There's so many better ways to deal with those big 2/2s now. You can lock the Yoshino in place with multiple freezing effects. I think Alice just straight up beats Data Live because Alice would just bully its board. Or at the very least, it would like do enough, right? Not to mention that everything has a level 2 killer, an oversized killer, like stuff that gets power on play. Like there's so much more now that more of these sets have. Not to mention there are better standby decks. Quince and MTI on their own have board that they can use to beat Dal's board. Like if you unrestricted Data Live, it would not be broken. It would be very good, but it would not be broken in the way that it was when it dropped. Data Live was way too powerful when it came out. I said that for months before it came out. Not to toot my own horn, I was not the only one, nor was that an unpopular opinion. But like, we knew Dal was busted on release. But it's not anymore. And this is the most cohesive thing that I can come up with, and it's not all that cohesive, is that I feel like the restriction list exists as a way to push product. The restriction list has done everything that we said it was going to do on this channel. And I think we're just seeing more and more evidence that it's not good for the game. And frankly, to a certain extent, like, you know, looking at the data from Springfest and even from Worlds, Quince and SDS, they were the best decks in the format at Worlds for sure. And in BSF, and you can make the argument that because BSF, is a little bit further away from the meta, we've seen more in the more recent tournaments that it seems to be coalescing around something that feels more meta, especially in the bigger regionals. But like, SDS and Quince are not unbeatable by any means. Hololive is literally beating them. Lots of stuff top. 8 Standby has been on about half the teams that have topped. SDS has been on less than half the teams that have topped.
So overall, the ban is in effect. We have more Springfest to go. We're looking forward to seeing some of those results, seeing if there's any real changes, if the ban list actually did anything regarding tournament health and quality.
Philippines on Sunday, and then France and Texas will be the following Sunday. Then we get into May. Mexico City, followed by Madrid and Chicago on May 14th. So we'll see what happens. I think the most interesting will be to see how it affects the Quince lists. Because SDS, we kind of already know what they're going to do to deal with it, right? They're going to maybe lean more into the Merlin, and they're probably going to play the top check CX swap, right? Like those are kind of immediate, understood fixes. For Quince, we may see a little bit more variation how they get that extra mill and that extra selection. So it'll be interesting to see how the Quince players respond to this restriction. The restriction that I think most of them knew was coming. This is like to the card what we expected the choose one of 3 to be, assuming it was Quince. So this wasn't really a big surprise to anybody, I don't think. I think that we're going to get our first good look once we get into May, and we will definitely be talking about all of it. We'll have 5 cards, 5 minutes on Thursday. Next Tuesday, Brandon will have, I believe, the Alice deck. Is that right?
That is correct.
And then we'll have gameplay for that the following Thursday, and in 2 weeks, another Clock Talk. We will talk about the Philippines, France, and Houston. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.